The First Amendment protects our freedom of religion, and that has two parts to it, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause says that the government cannot establish a religion. This is generally pretty straightforward. However, there are some complications. For example, can the government fund parochial schools, meaning religious schools? The answer is generally yes, but the public funding, government funding, cannot be used for the religious education part. So any religious education that's done in parochial schools must be funded through whatever religion has established that school. Now, can public schools that are not parochial schools require school prayer? Generally, they cannot require it. No, because that would be considered establishing a religion. Can schools require that these students say the Pledge of Allegiance? Doesn't seem as religious as prayer, right? But the Pledge of Allegiance has the words under God in it. So does that mean they're establishing at least a monotheistic religion with a single God? Maybe not a specific God, but that could be considered establishment since public schools are government funded. Moreover, what about students who, say, are Jehovah's Witnesses and therefore can't pledge allegiance to the flag because that could be seen as worshiping a graven idol? Now, that is not just a hypothetical. That case actually came up in front of the Supreme Court twice. In the case of Gobetis, the Supreme Court heard basically that. A Jehovah's Witness child did not want to pledge allegiance to the flag because it violated their beliefs, and they got in trouble with the school. Case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was heard just after the fall of France during World War II. Felix Frankfurter wrote the opinion of the court and basically said that national unity in the face of war is really important and serves a compelling national interest, and that trumps any sort of discomfort that might be felt here because it's important to have the sense of national unity and pride. A few years later, the case of West Virginia versus Barnett, Justice Jackson wrote the opinion of the court for a case that was basically exactly the same, but they changed their minds. This was further along in the war, and it started to seem a little bit like the Nazis forcing kids to pledge allegiance to the national flag in violation of their own religion. Especially because at this point, we were well aware that the Nazis were putting Jehovah's Witnesses in concentration camps along with basically anyone else who didn't have the same religion. So this meant that we started feeling a bit of discomfort forcing kids at school to do something that was against their own religion. And Justice Jackson in this decision in West Virginia versus Barnett said that if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is the right to not have to speak against one's own convictions. So in this case, we see the court really quickly turn around and change their mind on how the Establishment Clause applies here. For the most part, though, the Establishment Clause is relatively straightforward, though. Less straightforward is the Free Exercise Clause, because what happens when civil liberties and civil rights collide? What happens when your free exercise of your religion might interfere with someone's right to do something? In one case, we saw the court try to deal with what happens when a Christian baker is asked to make a cake for same-sex couples' wedding. Is making that cake forcing him to speak in support of same-sex marriage, which was against his religion? That case was decided basically on very, very narrow terms, in which the court said that the baker was sort of maybe in the right, but really it was because the Civil Rights Commission that heard the initial case was in the wrong, because they were automatically dismissive of religion in a way that was considered hostile, but only because of that. And so it was a narrow case that didn't necessarily carry a lot of weight. So we don't know if the same case happened again, how the court would rule. And there's actually a case coming up soon about a web designer who's refusing to make websites for same-sex couples' weddings. So we will see how that case gets decided, but we don't actually know yet. So the First Amendment, in terms of religion, is intended to stop the government from becoming tyrannical, but it has ended up creating this sort of conflict potentially between our freedom of religion, our freedom to practice our own religion, and individuals' rights to not be discriminated against.